Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to Season 6 of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I am so excited to introduce our next guest, who is Charanya Kannan. I believe I said that right. Charanya, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Simone. Yes, you got that right, and you're one of the very few who got that right.
Oh, awesome. So we met last year during a conference. We were both on a leadership panel discussion together, and I thought, I'm really impressed by your answers and how you showed up in the presentation. So I thought it would be great to get you over to the podcast to share your career story. So give our listeners a little blurb or a little insight on how you made your way to the driver's seat in your career.
I work in Silicon Valley right now. I work for a FinTech company. I'm the global lead for consumer insights. I've been doing this for about 2 years right now. Before that, I've had a pretty long career straddling different things. I started out with engineering, and then I moved into marketing, where I worked for the leadership program of the Tata Group in India. The Tata Group is like a large conglomerate that owns like Jaguar, Land Rover, among a few other interesting international brands. And so the Tata Group owned a trucking company in South Korea. So I was with them for 3 years as in a leadership capacity, their strategy team. I was the youngest woman and the only woman to hold a leadership role. And obviously that resulted in me getting into Harvard Business School. That's how I moved to the West. And after Harvard, I did strategy consulting for a few years. And then I ended up at Silicon Valley because it feels like this is the place to be in this century. So that's a bit about the stuff that I've done. So I've worked across, multiple geographies, multiple organizations. So, Indian companies, Korean companies, East Coast and West Coast, and East Coast and West Coast are like two different countries in some sense. So I've worked across different geographies. I've worked across different industries, automotive, which tends to be a little more, strung up in processes. And, it's an older industry. It's a traditional industry versus tech right now, FinTech. It's like fast moving. It's quick. It has a lot of digital natives. It adapts very quickly. So I've seen, I can say I've seen quite the spectrum of like industries, of geographies, and all of these. So to me, when I started out, given the cultural context of where I started out, I was always a feminist, but I'm sort of, increasingly appreciating or expanding the boundaries even more as I moved to the West. So in the East, I was a feminist for the context there, but I wasn't doing as much as what I was doing here. So, over there, the culture demands that, we respect people who are older than us, and we respect their decisions. And respect manifests itself in a very different way than in the US. And so, when I was working for these companies in India and Korea, I would be hesitant to ask my manager for things because you don't want to come across as this aggressive person, particularly because there were too few women in the industries that I was working over there. So you don't want to come across as, you want to be this good girl. You don't want to be this person who shakes up things and who asks for things and who's perceived as like greedy or dominant or ambitious. And so because of that, I would always rely on my manager and my managers to give me what they thought that I deserved. I never thought it is possible for me to calibrate my performance. In fact, in one of my very first jobs, I had the opportunity of picking between 4 to 5 different roles. It was a leadership rotational program, and the head of HR and I were having a discussion on what my interests are and what I want to pick. And I frankly couldn't choose between 3 roles. And at the end of the 20-minute conversation, I told the head of HR, I said, you know what's best for me. You've seen and you've groomed many people, and so you pick the right role for me because I trust you entirely. And
I got to stop you there because the story is getting really, really good. And I can relate to having had other people make decisions for me. I just did an interview with someone else who was talking about, other people making decisions. So trusting HR, I have done it myself to not know, right? And so, wow, I just want to pause it because I know that there are listeners who are able to resonate with what you just said, Charanya, about trusting HR. And I'm not saying not to trust HR. That's not what I'm saying, but trusting others, your hiring manager, line manager, whatever it is, to make the career decision for you. All right, continue the story.
I realized a couple of months later that was I shouldn't have said that. The realization came pretty quickly because the head of HR wasn't like their key focus wasn't working towards my best interest. Their key focus was managing the cohort of 20 people in leadership roles. Trying to place us all in the 20 different roles that were available. And so what the head of HR ended up doing, and I don't fault them for that because that's how the organization works, is they gave everyone their choice of what they wanted, and the leftover role was given to me.
Oh, what a valuable lesson.
So that taught me a really critical lesson. But then as life happens, sometimes you learn these things, but you fail to apply these lessons in different contexts. When the context becomes different, you don't understand or appreciate the situation. So obviously, in other contexts where I had to choose things, I would never let anyone choose anything for me, but that still didn't make me get onto the driver's seat. When I was working in South Korea, I would never ask for things. I would never ask for projects. So I would always say, you know what is best for me. You place me, like, should I be focusing on South Africa or Thailand? I don't know. You're my boss. You know best. Like, you have the better perspective. So you make a call, and I'm ready, and I'm willing to do whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to do.
I'm going to interrupt again and ask you a question, Charanya. Is that a cultural thing? I deal in diversity and inclusion, so my mind is wondering about cultures and about the Indian culture. Is that something, where does that come from, where you feel that you've got to ask for permission to experience your brilliance, like have someone else direct your course? Does that have anything to do with your cultural upbringing?
It definitely has something to do with my cultural upbringing. So I don't want to paint broad brushstrokes here, saying, Indian culture versus the US culture, because these cultures are so nuanced and so different that I wouldn't broadly box things. Because even in India, you have a lot of women who ask what they want, and the landscape is changing very quickly. But at some level, yes, I didn't have role models around me growing up. So growing up, when somebody asked me, what do you want to be? I only wanted to be a teacher or a Miss Universe, because these are the only roles that I've seen women take up and women do. And I never really saw, like, women leaders and there was the occasional one woman prime minister in India, which the US still isn't fortunate enough to have. But those were seen as exceptions rather than norms or role models. And so then I guess the absence of role models is where the permission seeking behavior came in, because all the women around me were generally asking permission for different things. And so I do didn't want to be perceived as aggressive, or I didn't want to be perceived as like commanding or demanding. And so I thought I would be rewarded if I was a loyal servant, always executing what my manager wants. And so that is how I was for the first year. And no one told me that, you have to stand up for yourself. Those principles. I learned a lot of that in the West, like Harvard and beyond. No manager pulled me up by my collar and said, hey, stop doing that, like take ownership. I felt like managers, they were very happy when they had like subservient employees who were willing to execute what their thought process was. And so, that behavior, it was rewarded. And so because it was rewarded, I continued that behavior even more, because, that's how, the human brain works. So that's how things were, until I realized, I wasn't getting what was due for me. 2 or 3 years into the role, I realized that I was promised something, but somebody else was given that. And the way it unfolded was also very unpleasant. And so without getting into too many specifics, I quickly woke up from my sleeping beauty nap that was going on for the last couple of years. And that is when I realized, okay, now this is what is happening. Now, I've been a good person all along, and this goodness was not rewarded. And therefore, I should stop being good and I should start acting selfish. And so, so that is when, I was able to like escalate some issues to the CEO, to the vice president, get what was due for me. And that also helped me build some relationships and get the right recommendation letters. And it paved a path for me to get into Harvard, because then the CEO and the vice president were willing to endorse me to study here in the West. And that's how I moved here to Harvard. So the fact that I was willing to look beyond my manager and think of what matters most to me, rather than pleasing my manager, I think that made a crucial difference in my career. And that's when I moved to the West. I moved to Harvard, and after that, the conversations here, I feel it happens at a very different, at a different scale. Like the conversations around feminism, diversity, and inclusion, it all happens at a very different scale over here. And when I first came here, I was just amazed. Like there was a term called benevolent sexism. Oh my God, like that's exactly what I've been trying to say all these years, but there was no word for it and nobody understood it. Like, when I tried saying that, nobody understood that in the automotive setup, where generally the average age is like 45 plus, and you have older males whose wives are typically stay-at-home parents. So I just came here and I picked up all of these words and these vocabulary, and I found all of these groups of people who knew exactly what I was talking about. And that is when I realized I haven't really even had like a female colleague to talk and to share things with. I had a lot of like, I also obtained a marketing degree in India, my engineering degree in India. I had a lot of women, a lot more compared to the United States. In fact, when it comes to engineering and all of that. But many of them were in slightly different industries, which were more women friendly, like the hospitality, services, IT, etc. And so they didn't face the problems that I had, because I was working in a really traditional industry, which was heavily male dominated, like, manufacturing and automotive. And so just moving here and finding, so many women who speak the same language that I do was so liberating and so refreshing. And since then, I've always sat in the driver's seat.
I love that. Love that story. And it sounds like finding your community or finding your tribe that really pours into you allowed you to further flourish in your career.
Absolutely. My community at Harvard, my community right now in the Silicon Valley, people like you that I meet in like interesting conferences and events, Facebook groups. There's a group called Moms in Tech. I love that group because the kind of advice you get over there, I see so many women who are in the stages that I was, when I started out my career a decade ago, and the advice that they get is so empowering. I really wish I was part of these circles and these groups that gives out such wonderful advice, but I unfortunately did not have such communities back in the day.
I agree with you. I thought the same thing earlier I'm sorry, it's 2021 at the moment. In 2020, I went out to Las Vegas to the Black Enterprise Women of Power Summit. And I said to myself, if I had known about this when I was in corporate, I might still be in corporate America today. It was an amazing community of beautiful Black and brown women, elegantly dressed and in different senior positions, just pouring into the younger generation. And I was just absorbing it, but at a different stage in my life. So I truly believe in the communities that you're talking about. And I am a member of several different Facebook groups that really are truly supportive. And I did not engage in social in that way when I was in the corporate space.
Yeah, and that is why, Simone, I think what you're doing is great, because all of us have a responsibility to give back. And hopefully, many women who are listening to this podcast can probably pick up nuances that you and I, we didn't have the benefit of this a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. And if you're listening, go back to the archives because we've already done 90 episodes. I've already recorded 90 episodes of this podcast, and there is just an amazing amount of information to support you on your career journey. It's like going back to school and just getting a lot of good career advice. So, Charanya, I have a couple questions for you. The first thing that comes to mind for me is you have had this wealth of experiences in different cultures, from India to South Korea to Silicon Valley, etc. And so tell me what goes through your mind, or how you became so courageous to take these leaps, these career leaps to different cultures and vastly different cultures, to grow in your career.
So I think partly, they have this phrase which says ignorance is bliss. And so I think when I started out my career, I was naive, and so I was just yearning for adventure. And so it didn't seem like, oh my God, like, is this the right move for my career? If something seemed unattainable or something that seemed impossible, I would always jump upon it, because I was willing and wanting to prove myself. I wouldn't ever think of, will I be a fit? Will I succeed? Those questions never really crossed my mind, because I was yearning for that adventure. Having said that, this is a good reminder for me, Simone, because I feel like, of late I've started thinking more of, will I be a fit? And while that's a good rational thing to do, I feel like I've lost that, that little bit of that youthful, naive attitude, so to speak, where you don't think as much, you just go on to do different things. So that's how my adventures happened. I've worked in rural areas, which were rural areas in India, where you don't have water supply or power supply, and I've worked with nonprofits over there. And I did that out of a sense of adventure, of proving to myself that I can do that. And at that time, I wasn't thinking about, is that safe for me? Is that okay for me? And similarly, when I took up this assignment in South Korea, I never really thought about, it never really struck me until I went there that I was the only woman there. But it never really struck me, we're in a different geography. Like, how do I manage and all of that? All of that came much later, when you're sort of like thrown into the pool, and you just learn, there's no time to be afraid. You just jump, and then you have to survive. And so that's how my initial years were, and I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. Awesome. So having had these different experiences, what is your formula for owning your career? What would you tell our listeners? What is the secret sauce? What is the formula for owning your career?
The secret sauce is honestly just a switch in my mind, which makes me think like, what would a white male do?
Oh,
Right. So,
I may title your episode that.
so this was a valuable advice I got from a friend at Harvard. When I was contemplating something, she came and said, just think of what will a white male do, and then just do that. And that has been so liberating in so many fronts. Like, so many questions that we tie ourselves up with, like, is my hair curly enough? Is my hair straight enough? Is the color of my skin the right skin tone? And all of these questions, like, it's just, what would a white male do? Like, they would not care about it. So right. So that has honestly been, every time I'm in doubt, that phrase comes up to my mind, and it really tells me what I have to do. So this year I actively, I asked for my promotion, and I got my promotion. I
Congratulations.
Thank you. When I took up this job in Silicon Valley, I advocated for myself. I showed a lot of data as to why I should be paid, what I should be paid, and I got more than what I wanted. And in terms of role as well, I've been the projects that I take up within my organization. I've been pretty vocal about what my interests are, what I want to do, and I've been pretty successful in getting that. And it just surprises me how easy it is to ask for these things and get these things. Of course, there were a couple of things that I have asked for and I haven't gotten, and it's fine. Like the worst case scenario is this, just that you get a no. But really, the key is being thoughtful about how you ask those things. Like I have my performance to back me up, so it's not like you're not good at what you're doing and then you go ask for a promotion. Like that doesn't work, right? So you have your work to speak for yourself, and then you have a bunch of people who are willing to stand by you and support you in your asks. So building that network and building that community of people who are willing to stand for the work that you do has been pretty that has been pretty helpful as well. And then being respectful about your asks and wants, and aligning that with what the leadership needs, has also been an incredibly powerful way of navigating your own course in the organization.
Mm. So let's talk about the community or the support circle of sponsors and mentors and advocates. What advice can you give to our listeners to build a robust circle, career circle to support their growth?
This is in terms of like how do they build a career circle, right? So the first thing is make sure you have friends who have similar career interests and ambitions, like yourself. Sometimes it's hard to find in your circles. Like sometimes I do find that some of my closest friends, they've all chosen for a different they've chosen to have different things from their life, to focus on their kids, to focus on their family, and to step away from their career. And while I'm happy for their choices, and I'm happy for what they choose, I feel like if you surround yourself with too many of those of people who make different choices that are different than yours, it might be hard to form that circle. So to me, having a group of like-minded people who face similar problems and similar anxieties, like you is very important. And so that is why if you don't have an organic community, like Facebook has a ton of groups. Lean in circles, I've heard, are pretty powerful, although I haven't been a part of one. At Harvard, we have something called Harvard Circles, which is we're a group of 5-6 women who meet once every month, and we discuss our challenges and difficulties at career, family, and all of that, and we give each other advice and support. So just being a part of these networks, and actively maintaining these networks, like actively turning up and showing up to those meetings, is like a really important way by which you can build these connections. The second one is just there are many podcasts and blogs and stuff out there. So reaching out to those people, and building your connections that way could be very powerful. The third thing is building influence within your organization. So being able to assist people in your organization when they need help, or being able to sometimes people don't vocalize what they need, so having that emotional quotient to understand what people around you really need and how you can support them with that, really helps in building that relationship. And I feel it gets reciprocated as well. And so that's how I've built my network and influence within my organization.
Wonderful. It sounds like your Harvard experience or connection or network has really supported you. It sort of seems game changing. And so I wonder, to those people who do not have Harvard but have a college or some sort of education behind them, how to tap into that network. I know personally I have not fully tapped into, I went to UConn and Quinnipiac, and I've not tapped in as much as I could. So talk to us about, you just mentioned like showing up and attending, but give us a little bit more context for how to successfully cultivate that collegial network.
Yeah, so that at the risk of sounding a little uppity, it's not like it comes naturally to people from Harvard as well. So in at Harvard, we were actually taught the importance of networking. We were taught the importance of staying together. So it wasn't assumed that people have that skill and they're born with that skill set. So we had courses and classes and discussions where we were taught how to network. And so I think that is valuable. And the second thing is things like Harvard Circles is something that Harvard actively promotes and sustains. And so despite that, we do find, attendance tapers off. In the beginning of the year, we have lots of people who claim they're interested, and then the pressures of life happens. They just drop out of these networks. So, while this is something that, even for an organization, even for people who come to Harvard, who are generally very driven and all of that, it hasn't been easy. It requires a lot of like attention, constant focus, and it requires like, a step-by-step learning. So that has to, if those networks do not organically exist in colleges, this would be, a plea from my end for college managements and administration to try and set up those networks actively. The second thing is alumni, powerful alumni like people like you can actively take up the cause of championing these networks. And while that's definitely never easy, but just forming things like a group me group or a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group, where people, even if they occasionally say hi and they know what everyone else is up to, I guess that could be a very good way to. And the third thing is like my reliance on Harvard network is actually very minimal, because the class is very diverse. People do a lot of different things. To me, I rely more on, for example, none of my, except for like three or four of us, I don't think many of my female classmates have children yet, whereas I'm a mom. And so I don't rely on my Harvard network as much as, Harvard does a good job of trying to keep the network alive, but I don't really tap into the network as much as I tap into some of my other networks, which is, moms who are working, and some of my Facebook groups where I will quickly get in for advice. Like, there's a parenthood group, there's like a fintech group in Facebook, there's like a moms in tech group, which I really adore. So some of the struggles that are unique to me, which is how do I balance my life and my work and all of that. There are so many women who are in the same boat that I am, and some of these groups, I would say, if my networking, if I would say, if that's like 100%, I would literally say my college networks are less than 20-30%. Another 70% is these strangers that I meet on the internet, people like you, that they have been pretty supportive in like different aspects of my journey.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And sometimes I think Facebook gets a bad rap, but these powerful groups exist on Facebook. And I have not, excuse me, I have not gotten into the LinkedIn groups as much as I'm involved in the Facebook group. And now there's Clubhouse, which is a whole different ball game. But the social aspect should not be underestimated. And the power of networking and relationship building should not be underestimated. And I remember when I was in corporate, I underestimated that because I wasn't taught about networking. And so I was taught to do my work heads down, don't hang out at the water cooler, get your work done, and you'll get promoted, you'll get your paycheck, be there for a long time, etc. And it does not work that way.
It does not work that way, because how do you quantify work? In schools you had exams, you had these graded scoring systems like the GMAT and the SATs, where you give the same set of questions to everyone and then you know who the high performers are. Work is not like that. Everybody, like, people don't do the same work. Everyone's work is different. So how do you calibrate that? So when a manager chooses who they want to promote, it's like it's replaced. Like, that's a difficult question. Like, how do you quantify the work done by these 10 people who report to me? The easier question that their mind subconsciously swaps out is, who do I like the most?
Mm.
So, and I study behavioral sciences as well, and how the human brain works. We can argue if this is right or wrong, but this is really how the human brain works. Like, who do I want to spend the most time with? Like, whoever I promote, I'll be working the most with them. And who do I enjoy spending time with? That's a primal question that they tend to answer, rather than getting into the harder question of quantifying and calibrating different people's work.
Oh, I love what you're saying. I wish I knew this many, many years ago, but I just did not. And so, listeners, if you're listening, well, of course you're listening, but take note to what Charanya is saying, because I think it's very valid. I do want to ask you, Charanya, about the power of the ask. What can our listeners do to build up those ASK muscles? What can they do? What resources, books, whatever resources to help you get stronger in building your ability to ask for the promotion, ask for the raise, ask for the sponsor, ask for whatever it is. How do we build up those muscles?
When I worked in strategy consulting, this was something we would do. I would get feedback on a weekly basis. Sometimes that was difficult, but honestly, it contributes to a tremendous learning and growth. In a span of like a couple of months. And so every time I go into those meetings, I go into with a list of like, these are the things I set out to accomplish at the beginning of the week, and this is what I accomplished. And then from a relationship perspective, this is the support that I expect from you, and it'll be great to get some of this, like this is going well and this is not going well, so how can we improve that? I got into this muscle of doing that on a weekly basis in strategy consulting, because things move at a very fast pace over there. Outside strategy consulting, you don't have to do that on a monthly basis. Like even doing that on a quarterly basis, once every 3 months, just setting aside half an hour to think of, what did I set out to accomplish this quarter? Have I finished that? Yes or no? If I finish that, like, well, yes, great. But if I haven't finished that, what are the obstacles? What's the support that you need from your manager? And how can you perhaps execute that with their help or with something else? So come up with, that will give you an idea of where you stand, and then that will help you quantify what the obstacles are, and that will help you quantify what the asks should be. And so this is a way of, you focus the ask not on yourself but on your work. And so that's a good way into getting practicing or building the muscle of like asking for things, which is asking for support, asking for resources. And so the more you start asking for things that are related to your work and less related to you, and you build that muscle, at the end of the year it might become easier to ask for yourself, like, what do you want? Is it a raise? Is it a promotion? Is it a job change? So that's one step to build the asking muscle. The other step is to just practice it with a trusted friend. So before you go in for a large ask, just get on a video call with a friend, and particularly in COVID times, video calls, if not a coffee. So get on a call and just try rehearsing out with them, like get their feedback. Most times an ask is more aggressive in our head. The other person doesn't perceive that way. So just getting that validation from a trusted friend would be really helpful for you to rehearse and get those nerves and jitters out before you go and do that ask. And frankly, it just gets easier over time.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. As we begin to wrap up, can you tell our listeners, if they would like to stay connected with you, how they can do so?
I'm available on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn ID is Charanya Kannan 86. And then I'm happy to answer emails as well at charanyakannan86@gmail.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Charanya, this has been amazing. I have so many other questions I can ask, but I do want to be respectful of your time and our listeners' time. So thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thanks, Simone. This was great for me because I haven't while I'm doing these things, it was interesting for me to get on a 30-minute session with you to actually talk through my journey, because I haven't thought about it in with this lens. So this was really interesting for me.
Wonderful. Well, it is an exciting journey, and pat yourself on the back. What an amazing story and so many good things that you've done.
Thanks, Simone. This is a great session, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. We're at 90, and hopefully you get to 9,000 soon.
Yes. And so I'll have to have you come back when it's 100 or something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.